Knox County students, I'm Brittany Stanford and I teach 6th grade at Halls Middle School. Today's lesson is based on Task 2 for Grade 6 ELA. If you don't have this assignment yet, it can be found by visiting the KCS website at knoxschools.org and by clicking See All Resources under the KCS at Home logo. So it'll look like this rectangle down here at the bottom of our screen. Please be sure to complete the entire week's task before continuing this video. If you haven't completed the KCS at Home Summer Edition task number 2 for grade 6 ELA, pause the video, finish up your work, and then come back and join us so that we can go over it all together. As we're going through the lesson, if you have a hard time understanding me for any reason, here are some options and built-in supports that might help you. You can turn on the closed captioning. If that's available, it'll be a little CC down at the bottom of the screen. You can also adjust the video's playback speed to slow down the video. Another thing you can do is watch the lesson in short clips. That's what's great about a videoed lesson. You can pause it, you can go back and re-watch a part if you need to. So that's there if you need to do that as well. And then finally, maybe ask a parent or a grandparent, brother, sister, cousin, anybody that's there at your house to watch this lesson with you. And then that way, you can stop the video as you're watching and you can talk to your partner about what you've heard, what you've understood. You can walk through any questions you might have with them. So just like you would with like a partner in a classroom setting. So those supports are there if you need them. So don't be afraid to do any of those things. All right, let's get started. This week's lesson is called A Graphic is Worth 1,000 Words. So our learning targets for this lesson are to evaluate the purpose of visual displays for communicating information and to create a visual display to support a claim. So to give you a little sneak preview of what's to come in this lesson, in this activity you will read data about the use of technology and use the information from that data to create a graphic of your very own. So you'll get a chance to get a little creative with it and have some fun. So before we really dive into all of the work that you guys have already done for this task, I want to do a little pause and brainstorm segment. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and after each question, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and brainstorm a little bit, think of some examples, and then come back so that we can discuss. Are you ready? All right, here's your first question. What are some examples of graphics or visual displays that you have seen in books, in other media, or in your classroom? So this is some sort of graphic that you've seen paired with a text. So pause the video and think of some examples. Okay, are you back? Now we're going to take it a step further. So you've brainstormed those examples of graphics you've seen with text. So now I'm going to ask you to take it on a little bit further. So now I want to know, how do those graphics or visual displays support the information of the text that they're paired with? So for example, if you were given an article and it had a photo with it, how did that photo support the information from the text? Did it give you further information? Did it just help you understand a concept a little better? How did the graphics support the information of the text? So pause the video and think about that. So the first are line graphs. Line graphs show change in quantities over time. And obviously, as you can see, it's lines, and you follow the line to see how those quantities have changed. Another graphic that compares quantities is a bar graph, but bar graphs compare quantities within certain categories. So whereas the line graph measures change over time, the bar graph is going to measure quantities within specific categories. So like with this example here, favorite colors. So each bar represents a color. Another graphic that you'll see a lot is a pie graph or a circle graph. And pie graphs or circle graphs show proportions by dividing a circle into different sections. They kind of look like a pie or maybe a pizza that have been cut into some pretty wonky sized slices. But the thing that I really like about pie graphs and circle graphs is that it makes it really easy to see those numbers and see those proportions. So I can look at this circle graph and right away know that of these people that were polled, the majority of them said that romance movies were their favorite. Next is a flowchart, and that might be something a little new to you, or maybe you didn't think about it being a graphic that would be paired with a text. But a flowchart just shows a sequence or steps, and you will follow the arrows on the flowchart in order to read it and to understand the message that it's trying to get across. Next is one that I'm sure a ton of you have already seen, and that's a timeline. A timeline lists events in chronological order. Next is a table. Tables use columns to present information in categories that are easy to compare. So the very first question, it's going to be found after that list of those graphics, and it says, use the preceding descriptions. So preceding just means the descriptions that come right before this question to identify what type of graphic each of these is. So you're going to use those descriptions, read them carefully, and then identify these 4 specific graphics of what type they are. So if we look at this first one, we see some bars, which is kind of a hint. It is a bar graph, so that would be used to compare quantities of different categories. The next one, we kind of follow this line throughout this graph. So that one is a line graph, and that would be used to measure a change in quantity over time. The next one, I looked at it, and to me it looked like a family tree. And a family tree is actually an example of a flow chart. And then finally, we've got this circle, and it's been broken up into different pieces to show us different proportions of the whole. So that is, of course, a pie graph or a circle graph. So here are the tips that your task included, and we're going to be following these tips as we look at these 2 graphics that were included in the lesson. So the first thing you want to do is read the title. So just like you would with a book or a story or an article, you want to read the title because it's going to tell you what that graphic's all about. The next thing you want to do is read the labels, headings, subheadings, numbers. They're all going to tell you what the graphic is about, and they're going to describe the specific information that's given within each of the categories of the graphic. Analyze just any of the other features that you see. If you have a flow chart or a line graph, follow those arrows and the lines to understand the direction or the order of the events or the steps. You can annotate these graphics as well. And so I've set kind of a purpose for you in annotating and in reading this graphic. The first thing is highlight statistics that surprise you or that you think are interesting. The next one, you've got that little section on your page that says My Notes. Don't be afraid to use that little column there and, summarize some of the information or make little notes for yourself. Ask questions if you need to, but that's a great section to do that. And then finally, circle any unknown words or phrases that you might see. So the first thing it tells us to do, right here on my little checklist, read the title. Now it's kind of a long one, but first off, we already know up front this is a circle graph. It's already been labeled for us. But then here's our title in this dark purple kind of rectangle. Figure 7, proportions of daily computer, tablet, and smartphone use devoted to various activities among U.S. teens. And it looks like it was put together by Common Sense Media. Now that's kind of a long title, a lot of words there. But just from reading it, I can tell it's going to be talking to us about the way that teens use their devices, right? Computers, tablets, smartphones, whatever, but it's going to show us how teens are using their devices, how they're spending their time. So that's really interesting, and it's probably pretty relevant to you all. All right, so we've read the title. Now let's read the labels. As you can see, we have a key here, and so that'll be important when we analyze the features. So we have right here passive consumption at 39%, communication at 26%, interactive consumption at 25%, creation at 3%, and then other and 7%. So I've got you some guided questions over here on the side. Now me, when I look at this, the first thing that I was kind of surprised by, so the first thing that I would probably highlight or underline if I was annotating, is this communication. Now, 26 is a pretty high percentage, and it seems to be the second highest, but still, I would have thought that that would have been a little higher. Now, I'm just basing that on my own device usage, and I'm not a teen, but still, I would have thought that might have been a little bit higher. And again, these you should have already answered these, so I'm just going to share with you what I thought about each question. And your answers might be a little bit different, and that's okay, as long as they're along the same lines. But we're going to be returning to the graphic to answer the questions, and then using evidence from the graphic to support our responses. So everything that we say needs to go back to those graphics, because those are our text for this task. So here is how I described what this graphic is showing. The graphic shows how teens use their digital devices every day. Most of the time teens spend on devices each day is devoted to passive consumption. All right, number 3, what does the whole circle represent? And then what do the slices represent? The whole circle represents the time teens spend on devices each day. So that circle is 100% of the time that teens are spending on their devices. And then the slices are just those specific activities that they're doing and how much time they're spending on those activities. Okay, so number 4 is going into author's purpose a little bit. It's asking us, why did the author choose to present this information in a circle graph? And I said the author most likely chose to present this information in a circle graph because it gives a visual reinforcement of the size of each number. Number 5, how is the information arranged in the circle graph when compared to the key? And then why do you think the author chose to organize the information this way? So you've got that circle graph in front of you, so look at it. Look at how it's organized. We have the colors here, passive consumption, communication, and they are in a certain order. And it looks like they're going from most to least, except for other, and we'll talk about that. So here's what I said. The colors in the graph and the names of the categories are listed in the same order, largest to smallest. The sizes go top to bottom on the key and clockwise on the chart. The category other is the exception. Number 6 is asking us to make a little bit of a prediction. And so this is where I said what when I circled passive consumption, that might come back into play. So it's asking us to make a prediction about what each category means. So what does the author mean by passive consumption, communication, interactive consumption, creation, all of that? So I'm just going to predict, and then as you've probably already seen with the second graphic, then we're going to be able to kind of check what we've predicted. So here are my predictions about each of the categories. Passive consumption is probably things such as watching videos or shows or listening to music. Communication is probably things such as texting and emailing. And interactive consumption is probably playing games because you're playing it with somebody else. And then creation is probably making videos, writing, maybe making music, just creating things, right? So your answers might be a little different. Maybe you have some different ideas for passive consumption and interactive consumption and all of that, and that's okay, because we're going to be able to have a chance to look back at this and see if we were correct or not. So now that we've looked at that first graphic together, we've read the entire thing, we've annotated a little bit, we answered some questions on it, I want you to look at this second one on your own. Based on your experience, do you think that this data is accurate? I was looking at it and it seemed pretty accurate to me. And again, I'm not a tween or a teen, but based on my own device usage, it looked pretty accurate. With the previous graphic, I said that I had been surprised about the communication. But now that I see it broken down here, I kind of see where it fits into it. It's definitely not surprising to me that teens spend over an hour of social media. I would think that maybe would be higher. So maybe I'm still surprised by the communication category. So, what were you guys surprised by? What do you think this is accurate? You guys are tweens and teens. Does this seem like your daily usage of data? So just think about that a little bit. And then we're going to go into looking at the questions that now go along with this table. Again, just like the first graphic, when we're answering these questions, we want to make sure that we return to the graphic as we respond to the questions and use evidence from the graphic to respond. So everything that we say needs to go back to those graphics. So number 7, what does this graphic show? And again, just like before, we're not wanting to quote the title exactly. We're wanting to kind of put it in our own words. So here's what I said. The graphic shows a breakout or a breakdown of the data about how tweens and teens use digital media daily. So whereas it's still showing us that time that's being spent on the devices, this is a real breakdown of how the time's being used. Okay, number 8, what do the numbers with colons represent? Remember, colon is just it's 2 dots. And then what do the percentages represent? So we kind of talked about this a little bit. So now I'll tell you what I said. The numbers with colons represent hours and minutes or time. So that's the exact amount of time that these teens and tweens are spending on their devices. And the percentages represent the proportion of time on the devices. So those percentages, just like with that first graphic and the circle graph, showed the proportions and the percentages. So we've kind of got 2 different types of data with this particular table. Okay, number 9, who spends more time on devices each day, tweens or teens? And how much time do they spend? So this is where you're going to want to go back and look at that graphic. And if we look down here at the totals, down at the bottom, that's going to tell us how much time each group spends. And it's pretty clear to see right away that it's the teens that spend the most amount of time. Teens spend more time on devices each day. 5 hours and 21 minutes. Tweens only spend 2 hours and 33 minutes. Number 10, what 2 major things are being compared in this table? And then why did the author choose to use a table? So we talked about tables and how easy they are to read. So that was kind of my thought process and why maybe this author chose to use the table. So I said the table compares the data between tweens and teens in several categories and compares time spent in each of the categories. The author chose to use a table because readers can see the numbers for both tweens and teens right next to each other. Okay, number 11, and we've already kind of talked about this one a little bit and used this bottom row for one of our previous questions. So it says, what does the row at the bottom show, and why did the author include that last row? So here's what I said. It shows the total time tweens and teens spend on digital media every day. The author included it to save readers from doing the addition themselves. So it just makes it very easy. That total time's right down there at the bottom for you. Okay, number 12. Look back at the prediction you made for question 6. Was your prediction confirmed? And if not, how can you revise your prediction? So we're going to go back and look at our answer to number 6. And now, similar to number 6, your answer for this question might be different than mine because you may have made some different predictions. But here were mine. Passive consumption is probably things like watching videos or shows, listening to music. Communication are things such as texting and emailing. Interactive consumption is probably playing games with other people. And creation is probably making videos or writing or something like that. So looking back at that table, most of my predictions were correct. I kind of got a lot of them correct. Now, the only thing I see here is I didn't say anything about social media in communication. So I kind of want to add that because I think that that's important, especially among tweens and teens today. So I would make a little bit of of a revision, and so here's what I said. Based on the data from the table, the predictions made for question 6, or the prediction made for question 6 was mostly confirmed. However, one revision that could be made is adding social media to the communication category. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there because I felt like it was important. Okay, we're going to compare and contrast these two graphics a little bit. So number 13, we're comparing. How is the content of the two graphics alike? So you've probably already noticed this yourselves, but both graphics show information about the use of digital technology in young people. But even though they are similar, there are some pretty major differences, and those you were able to look at in number 14. So how is the content for the two graphics different? So I said the first graphic shows percentages of time spent in terms of categories. The second graphic shows much more information about the time spent in the different categories, and it kind of breaks it down like we talked about. And then the second graphic also differentiates the data for tweens and teens. So the first graphic just had teens, this one has both. Okay, number 15 is asking us the purpose of each graphic. Why did the authors create them? What were they trying to get across? What were they trying to tell us or inform us about or educate us on? So here's what I said. The purpose of both graphics is to present information about the use of digital technology in young people. The first graphic shows the percentage of time devoted to each category, and the second graphic is more detailed and shows actual time spent in the categories. So the main point is that first sentence, right? It's that they're trying to present information to us about the use of digital technology in young people. How much time tweens and teens are spending on their devices. So that's the main purpose of these graphics. And then the final question about these specific graphics is, how does the information in the second graphic help you better understand the information in the first graphic? And we've already talked about this a lot in some of the other questions of how, the second one really breaks it down for us. So here's how I responded. The second graphic gives a more detailed breakout of the categories and breaks the information into two specific subcategories, tweens and teens. This information allows readers to gain a deeper understanding of how tweens and teens spend their time using technology. Whereas before we just had kind of these blanket terms like passive consumption, the second graphic really breaks it down and tells us what exactly passive consumption is. How much time they're watching TV, how much time they're watching videos, etc. All of the work that you've done in this task has kind of led us to this. This is why we looked at these graphics. This is why we've discussed all of the different aspects of them and talked about the differences and the similarities and what they were presenting to us. So what you're being asked to do now is to write a short argument supporting the following claim. Teens spend too much time being passive consumers on their devices. Now, you may or may not agree with that statement, with that claim, but that's the claim that we're being asked to back up. So that's what we need to provide evidence for. That's what we need to explain. So you've got a list down here, kind of a checklist, just like with reading the graphics, a checklist of things we want to make sure we include in our argument. So we want to state our claim clearly at the beginning. We want to provide clear reasons and evidence from the text that we've read. Now remember, we didn't read an actual printed text, we were reading graphics. So that's where all of our evidence is going to come from. And then we also want to maintain a consistent formal style and tone, just like you learned about last week with task 1. Now here is the argument that I wrote, and yours may look different, and that's okay. As long as you're supporting that main claim that teens are spending too much time being passive consumers on their devices, that's fine. And as long as your evidence is coming from those graphics that we read, yours can be a little bit different than this. Now, I used race to answer the argument. And you've seen that in some of the previous tasks. RACE just stands for restate, answer the question, cite evidence, and then explain or elaborate on your evidence. Now, we weren't really given a question to answer, so I used the R to just kind of restate that claim in a little bit different way, and that's what you see here in this blue. So as recent data suggests, today's teens spend too much time being passive consumers on their devices. This part that I left blank, or it's not highlighted, is just some background information. And while I wanted to include some of the other categories that the graphics discussed, but then still drive home that claim that the kids or the teens are still spending most of their time being passive consumers. So that's what I've done there. And then in this yellow highlighted portion, that's where my evidence came in. And as you can see, I've given the name or the title of the graphic, which my kids would probably complain about that because it's really long and my students hate when we have really long titles. But I still wanted to put it in there. And I said that passive consumption makes up approximately 39% of the time teens spend on devices. And then again, still wanting to show that they're still doing other things too, I said comparatively, teens use 26 time for communication, 25% for interactive, 3% for creation, etc. And then finally, in this last little part here, I wanted to elaborate on that evidence and kind of drive home that point that they're just spending way too much time being passive consumers and why that might be a negative thing. So what I said is, therefore, it is clear that teens are spending the majority of their time passively consuming media on their devices. Too much time is being spent mindlessly scrolling through apps and websites or watching video after video on YouTube while they could be interacting with others or engaging in the sense of community that can also be achieved on a device. Because that's what we can use our devices for too, is we can communicate. We can do things like this, where you're interacting with someone. It doesn't have to just be you scrolling. So I thought that was a neat way to kind of tie that argument up there at the end. And then the last thing that you were asked to do with this task is to add a visual to your argument. And this is where you had the opportunity to get a little creative with it. Now, I didn't create my own because I wanted to just give you some ideas and then see what all you all came up with. But the options are endless, right? You can use one of the graphics that was described in this lesson, or you could kind of come up with your own, just something that supports the text that you wrote. Because remember, a visual shouldn't overtake or overpower the text. It shouldn't be all about the visual. The visual should just support whatever you're saying and whatever you're writing. So your argument that you wrote, that should be where the most of your time was spent, and then this visual just kind of supports it and backs it up and just makes it even stronger, even more effective. So some ideas that I had were maybe like a flow chart where, we had that one with the lamp, but maybe you could do like, steps and say, well, are you doing this? And if you are, then maybe you're consuming media passively or, something along those lines. Another thing that I thought might be kind of funny is do like a diagram of someone passively consuming media on their device. So like, draw a kid with their phone and then you could label, like eyes glued to the screen, blocking out everyone else, something like that to kind of show what someone looks like when they're being a passive consumer. You could also do a bar graph that kind of mimics some of the data that was presented in the line graph, or excuse me, not the line graph, the circle graph and the table. So you could use that same data and just put it in a bar graph if you wanted to. You could also try to find a photograph. I found one here of this boy looking like he's being a passive consumer. He's just staring at his phone, where you see people in the background actually interacting with each other and talking and not being as passive and just glued to their phone. And there are so many pictures like that you could find, or even draw on your own. So those are just some examples that I thought of. I'm sure that you all came up with some really awesome stuff, and I wish that I could see them all. But, if you came up with something that you're really proud of, send it to your teacher. Let them take a look at it and see what visuals you created to back up this claim and this argument that you made. So thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you learned something. I hope you have an awesome day. And don't forget, a graphic is worth 1,000 words.